I brought my roommate's older sister her keys. Then she asked me to stay. The brass keyring was still heavy in my palm when I noticed the gray sedan idling at the end of Elena Parker's cul-de-sac. The first thing I registered wasn't the quiet suburban street or the afternoon sun hitting the brick facade of the house. It was her thumb locked against the painted doorframe, pressed so hard the skin around it had gone white. I stood on the porch and held out the heavy brass keyring. Elena wore a cream blouse buttoned high under a soft cardigan, sleeves pushed up like she had been sorting paperwork before I arrived. Her dark hair fell loose over her shoulders, but nothing about her posture was loose. One hand held the edge of the door. The other hovered near the keyring as if accepting it might confirm that the house was still hers to protect. "Your brother left these on the counter this morning," I said, keeping my voice level. "He mentioned you had a spare set for the apartment, and since I was auditing a site 2 miles from here, I figured I'd save him the trip." "Ethan, right?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She reached out and took the brass ring. Her fingers were freezing. "Thank you. It's good of you." But she didn't step back to close the door. Her gaze flicked past my shoulder, tracking something down the street. I didn't turn my head immediately. In corporate security, you don't broadcast that you've spotted the anomaly until you've assessed it. I shifted my weight, using the reflection in the glass storm door to see what she was looking at. A dark gray sedan was idling at the stop sign at the end of the cul-de-sac. It had been there since I pulled into the driveway. "Are you expecting someone?" I asked. "No." She blinked, her focus snapping back to me. She swallowed, a small, tight movement in her throat, just admiring the neighborhood. It was a terrible lie. The sedan finally rolled forward, the tires crunching slowly over the asphalt before turning the corner and vanishing. The moment it was out of sight, Elena's shoulders dropped 2 inches. The death grip on the doorframe loosened. "Did you eat yet?" I asked, my tone conversational, though my eyes stayed on the street. She looked at me, thrown by the mundane question. "What?" "No. I was just about to make tea." "If you're comfortable, I could use a cup of tea," I said, "or I can wait on the porch while you close the door. Standing in an open doorway with that sedan circling is not ideal." I didn't ask her what was wrong. I didn't push. I offered a choice and made the safety issue plain enough that she could decide without feeling managed. Elena hesitated, the brass keys clinking faintly in her palm. Then she stepped back. "Come in." The house was quiet, smelling of cedar and old paper. She set the heavy brass keyring on the entry table. It landed with a dull, solid thud. I logged the layout of the front room instantly. Large bay windows, standard single-pane glass, no visible alarm sensors on the sashes. A basic residential setup, practically paper-thin. "Black or green?" she asked from the kitchen. "Black is fine." I stayed in the hallway for a moment, examining the front door. The deadbolt strike plate was loose. The screws were stripped, barely biting into the wood. A solid kick would fold the door inward like cardboard. "You don't force a seized lock," my first mentor used to say. "You clear the debris and let the mechanism work." The principle applied to people, too. I walked into the kitchen. Elena was holding the kettle under the tap, her hands still unsteady. "Your front deadbolt needs longer screws," I said, leaning against the counter. I kept my hands in my pockets. "The strike plate is hanging by a thread." She turned off the tap. "I know. I've put in 3 maintenance requests. The landlord says it's functional." "It's decorative," I corrected mildly. "I have a 3-inch reinforced steel plate and a drill in my truck. Do you want me to fix it, or do you want to keep waiting on the landlord?" She looked at me. Really looked at me this time. Not as her younger brother's quiet roommate, but as a person standing in her kitchen offering a practical solution. "You just carry door hardware in your truck?" "I assess physical and digital security for corporate campuses," I said. "Old habits. The offer stands." "Okay," she said softly. "Yes, please fix it." I went out to the truck, retrieved my kit, and came back. I didn't ask about the gray sedan. I didn't ask why she locked the door behind me the moment I stepped back inside. Before I touched the deadbolt, I set the drill case on the entry rug and opened it where she could see every tool. Corporate sites trained you to narrate the boring parts, what you were doing, why you were doing it, and what would change after. Private homes needed the same courtesy. Elena stood beside the entry table with the brass keyring in her hand while I showed her the reinforced plate, the screws, and the small packet of wood filler. If any part of this makes you uncomfortable, stop. I said, the door belongs to you. I'm just fixing the frame. She looked from the loose strike plate to the quiet street beyond the glass. Fix the frame, please. That was the first real yes she gave me, and I treated it like a document signed in ink. I took out my impact driver and went to work. The screech of the drill filled the quiet house. I pulled the useless half-inch screws out of the frame and drove the 3-inch steel ones deep into the wall stud. When I closed the door and turned the thumb turn, the deadbolt threw with a heavy, satisfying clack. I stepped back. Try it. Elena walked over. She gripped the deadbolt and turned it back and forth. Locked, unlocked, locked. The frame didn't give a millimeter. Better, she said. Much. I packed my tools into the canvas bag. The tea? We sat at the small dining table. The mug was warm against my palms. Elena sat across from me, tracing the rim of her cup. His name is Marcus, she said suddenly. The silence had done its work. I set my mug down. The guy in the gray sedan. She nodded. We broke up 6 months ago. He doesn't like that I kept the house. We co-signed the lease. He moved out. But his name is still on the paperwork. He says if I report him to the police for driving by, he'll contact the property manager and claim I'm running an illegal business out of here to get us both evicted. It would tank my credit. I need this place. Ethan. It's close to my clinic. She was a physical therapist. Her brother had mentioned it once. So he uses the lease as leverage to keep you quiet while he patrols your street. I said, processing the data. Has he made physical threats? No, just the drive-bys and the texts. Her phone vibrated on the table. The screen lit up. Marcus, the preview line read, saw you had company. I still pay half the deposit. Elena. My stomach dropped. A cold, heavy sensation. But I kept my face entirely neutral. I wanted to pick up the phone. I wanted to find the gray sedan and explain the concept of a perimeter to him in a way he wouldn't forget. Instead, I left my hands flat on the table. I meant to just drop off the keys. I said, a deliberate contradiction to the fact that I had already settled into the chair. But if you want, I can look at the lease agreement. There are usually abandonment clauses. If he hasn't occupied the residence in 6 months, his leverage might be a bluff. Elena pulled the laptop half an inch closer to her side of the table. The brass keys stopped moving under her palm, and her voice came out flat. I can handle my own lease. Ethan, I'm not looking for a savior to manage my paperwork. Her tone was sharp, a direct result of her history with control. Marcus had clearly used logistics to trap her. My offer looked like the same cage, just painted a different color. Understood, I said immediately. I stood up, taking my empty mug to the sink. I didn't mean to overstep. I didn't apologize for the offer, but I respected the boundary instantly. I rinsed the mug, dried my hands on a paper towel, and picked up my tool bag. Wait, she said. She was still sitting at the table. You're just leaving. You said you had it handled. I said, stopping in the archway. I believe you. If you need me to look at the locks on the windows, I'm happy to, but I won't push into your business. Elena. She stared at me. The rigid set of her shoulders slowly thawed. Marcus would have argued with me for an hour about how I don't know what I'm doing. Marcus sounds like an idiot, I said mildly. A small, surprised laugh escaped her. It broke the tension in the room. Quick and genuine. She hesitated. Do you actually know how to read residential lease agreements? I read corporate access agreements for a living. I said, a residential lease is simpler, but we still treat it like evidence, not a guessing game, and only if you want me to. Okay, she said, pulling her laptop toward her. Show me. For the next 2 hours, we didn't talk about our feelings. We talked about clauses. We sat side by side at the dining table, the laptop open between us. This was my domain. I didn't need to posture or raise my voice. I just needed the data. Section 4, paragraph 2, I said, pointing at the screen. I kept my hand hovered above the keyboard, not touching it. Joint and several liability. He's right that an eviction hurts you both. But look at Section 9. She leaned closer to read the clause, then tapped the paragraph with the capped end of her pen. I kept my focus on the PDF and the line number glowing blue on the screen. Extended absence, she read aloud. If a tenant is absent from the premises for more than 30 consecutive days without notice, the landlord may declare the lease abandoned by that tenant. He moved out 6 months ago, I said. He abandoned the lease. His name on the deposit is a technicality, but he has no legal right to dictate who you have in this house, and his threat to terminate the lease unilaterally is void. He'd have to prove occupancy. Elena exhaled and rubbed the heel of her hand against one eye. When she reached for her tea, she missed the handle once, and the spoon clicked against the saucer before she steadied it. You're tired, I noted quietly. I haven't slept a full night in weeks, she admitted, staring at the screen. Every time a car drives by, I think it's him. We need to build a dossier, I said, a documented timeline of his harassment, texts, drive-bys, voicemails. If we take a clean, chronological file to the property manager and the police simultaneously, he loses the narrative. I have hundreds of texts, she said, overwhelmed. It would take days. I have software, I said. With your permission, I can run a metadata extraction on the text thread. It pulls every message from his number, strips it into a spreadsheet, and categorizes it by date and timestamp. Takes about 10 minutes. She looked at me, her eyes wide. You can just do that? It's what I do. Yes, she said, please, let's do it. We spent the afternoon building the perimeter. It wasn't physical, it was digital, and it was devastatingly organized. She unlocked the phone herself, exported the message thread herself, and handed me only the file she wanted processed. I opened a clean local environment on my tablet, not a cloud account, so nothing private left the dining table without her consent. Every time a new category appeared, drive-by, deposit threat, lease threat, false complaint, I asked before labeling it. She corrected my wording twice. I let her. The file had to sound like Elena, not like a man in a security polo had taken over her life. At one point, the software flagged 11 texts sent between midnight and 2 in the morning. Elena went very still. The kettle clicked off behind us. She reached for her pen, missed it, then picked it up on the second try and wrote sleep disruption in the margin with such careful block letters that I had to look back at the screen to keep my expression neutral. While the software compiled the data, Elena read out the dates of the drive-bys she'd written in a small notebook. I typed them into the master timeline. We were a machine, working in tandem. She provided the raw data, I built the structure. When she leaned across to point at a date in the notebook, the paper slid under her sleeve. I set one hand against the table edge to stop the notebook from falling. Got it, I said. That was March 3rd, she whispered. She pulled the notebook back toward her and drew a clean box around the date. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I returned both hands to the keyboard. Restraint? You don't force the mechanism. By 6 p.m., we had a 40-page PDF document. It was a sterile, irrefutable record of stalking. This is... Elena scrolled through the document. This makes him look exactly like what he is. Data doesn't lie, I said, unplugging my tablet. I'll print a hard copy at my office tomorrow. You review it. When you're ready, we file it. Thank you, Ethan. Lock the deadbolt behind me, I said, shouldering my bag. I walked out to my truck. I didn't look back until I heard the heavy clack of the 3-inch screws doing their job. 2 days later, the mechanism jammed. I was at my apartment reviewing a security audit for a tech firm when my phone rang. It was Elena. He escalated, she said. Her voice was thin, reined in by sheer willpower. I'm on my way, I said. When I pulled up to her house, the front door was open. I jogged up the steps. Elena was standing in the hallway, holding a piece of heavy stock paper. Her face was pale. What happened? I asked, checking the perimeter of the room visually. I went out to my car this morning, she said, handing me the paper. This was under the windshield wiper. I read it. It was a formal notice of lease violation, printed on the property management company's letterhead. It cited unauthorized alterations to the premises and repeated noise disturbances, threatening eviction within 14 days if not remedied. He went to the landlord, she said, her voice shaking. He must have told them I changed the locks or something. He's trying to force me out. This isn't a legal eviction, I said, analyzing the document. It's a warning notice. It lacks a magistrate's stamp. It's a scare tactic. It's working, she said bitterly. She crossed her arms, retreating into herself. He was on my property. Ethan. He walked right up to my car in the middle of the night. The deadbolt doesn't matter if he's just going to dismantle my life from the driveway. I looked at the piece of paper. The letter changed the shape of the threat. Marcus was no longer only circling the block. He had put paper in the system and tried to make the house turn against her. I need to install cameras, I said. Today. Exterior, covering the driveway, the porch, and the rear entrance. She looked up. I can't afford a wired system right now. I have inventory in my lockup, I said. Surplus from a corporate job. High definition, battery-operated, cloud-linked, removable mounts only. No drilling into brick, no permanent wiring, nothing that alters the property beyond what the lease allows. It will cost you nothing, and it takes me an hour. Ethan, I can't ask you to do that. You didn't ask. I offered. I set the paper down on the entry table, right next to the brass keyring. Do I have your permission to alter the exterior of the house? She looked at the heavy brass ring, then at me. Yes. I drove to my storage unit, retrieved the IP cameras, and returned. The afternoon was fading into a cool, overcast evening. I set up the ladder in the driveway. Elena came out onto the porch, bringing 2 bottles of water. The first camera went above the porch light, angled down enough to capture faces but not so low that it stared into the living room window. The second covered the driveway. The third watched the rear gate, where the fence latch had a shiny scrape that Elena admitted she had noticed last week and then convinced herself was nothing. I photographed the latch, added it to the timeline, and told her exactly what I was doing before I touched anything. No permanent screws into brick, I reminded her, holding up the removable mount. If the property manager asks, this is temporary safety equipment. We can remove it in 5 minutes without leaving damage. She gave a dry little laugh from the porch step. You make surveillance sound like a home improvement tutorial. That is because most surveillance is just home improvement with better paperwork. The laugh came easier that time. It did not fix anything, but it changed the air enough that she could hand me the next camera without her fingers trembling. You're very methodical, she said, watching me drill the mount into the eaves. A camera is useless if the angle allows for a blind spot, I said, securing the housing. I climbed down and took the water she offered. Thanks. You don't talk much about yourself, she observed. She sat on the top step of the porch. I stood at the bottom of the steps, looking up at her. Not much to tell. I travel. I fix broken systems. I go home to an apartment that looks like a hotel room. Why? Because building a home requires trusting that the foundation won't crack, I said honestly. In my line of work, you see a lot of cracks. Elena looked down at her hands. I thought I built a solid foundation here, but Marcus was just managing me. He managed the bills, the lease, the schedules. I thought it was care. I didn't realize it was control until I tried to make a decision without him. Logistics aren't love, I said quietly. I took a step up, closing the distance just slightly, but staying out of her immediate space. Care is giving someone the tools they need and letting them build it themselves. She looked at me, her dark eyes searching my face. The overcast light made the shadows on the porch deep and quiet. For a second, the air between us felt heavy, pulled tight like a wire. I wanted to sit next to her. I wanted to reach out and smooth the line of tension between her eyebrows. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. I need to sync the IP addresses. Can you read the serial numbers on the boxes for me? She exhaled a soft, almost imperceptible sigh and picked up the boxes. CM74. We finished the installation just as it got dark. I linked the feed to her phone. We stood in the kitchen, watching the crisp night vision feed of her driveway on the screen. "He can't step foot on the concrete without triggering an alert to your phone," I said. "If he does, you don't confront him. You call the police, and you show them this feed." "I feel safer," she said. She looked up from the phone. "Because of you." "You're safe because you have the data," I corrected gently. "No," she said, stepping closer. "I'm safe because you listen." She placed her hand over mine on the edge of the kitchen table, then looked at me until I understood she had chosen the contact herself. My hands stayed where they were. The phone screen glowed between us with the live camera feed, turning the driveway into clean evidence instead of a shadow. "You always step back," she said quietly. "Why do you always step back?" "Because you spent 2 years with a man who made your decisions for you," I said. "I won't be another man who uses your vulnerability to get what he wants. If I move closer, it happens because you ask me clearly, and because you can still change your mind after." She looked down at our hands, then back at the camera feed, then stay at the table a little longer, not as security, as Ethan. "I can do that." I stayed. We sat side by side with the laptop between us, reviewing alert settings and emergency contacts until the kitchen felt less like a bunker and more like a room where she could breathe. When she finally leaned her shoulder against mine for one steady breath, I let the moment exist, then moved the printed instructions closer to her hand. No speech, no claim, just the hum of the refrigerator, the heavy brass keys on the entry table, and the small proof that safety could be chosen without becoming a cage. The piece lasted exactly 48 hours. On Thursday morning, I was halfway across the state, conducting a live fire drill at a corporate data center. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it until the drill concluded. When I finally checked the screen, I had 3 missed calls from Elena. I stepped into a quiet corridor and called her back. She answered on the first ring. "He's here," she said. Her voice was a tight whisper. The center of my ribs went cold. At the house? No. At the property management office. She sounded like she was walking fast. The landlord called me in for a mandatory meeting regarding the lease violation. When I walked into the conference room, Marcus was sitting there. He told the landlord he's the primary leaseholder and he wants me evicted for cause so he can reclaim the property. "Where are you right now?" I asked, my pace quickening as I walked toward the exit of the data center. In the hallway outside the office, I told them I needed to use the restroom. Ethan, the property manager, was nodding along with him. Marcus looked so reasonable. He's wearing a suit. He brought printed copies of the noise complaints. "Listen to me," I said, my voice dropping into the flat, authoritative cadence I used in a crisis. "You are not going to be evicted today. Do you have the dossier?" "Yes, it's in my bag." "Good. I am 2 hours away. I cannot get there before this meeting ends." I stopped at my truck, unlocking it. "This is your arena. Elena, you have the facts. You have the timeline. He is relying on charisma and intimidation. You are going to rely on data." "I can't do this alone," she said, her voice cracking. "He talks over me. He always talks over me." "He won't today," I said fiercely, "because you are holding 40 pages of federal and state-level harassment documentation. If the property manager tries to evict you, you inform them that they are aiding in the continued harassment of a tenant, which makes them liable." "But Elena, do you want me to call the property manager right now and handle this over the phone, or do you want to walk back in there and finish it?" Silence held on the line. I heard one unsteady breath, then the faint click of a door opening somewhere behind her. "I want to finish it," she said. The tremor in her voice smoothed out into cold steel. "Then walk in there," I said. "Put the binder on the table, and don't let him interrupt you." "Okay," she said, "okay." She hung up. I got into my truck, started the engine, and drove back toward the city as fast as the law and traffic allowed. Every red light felt engineered to test whether I actually believed my own rule about restraint. The drive was agonizing. For 2 hours, I had to sit with the reality that I couldn't fix it for her. I couldn't stand between her and the threat. I had given her the tools, but she had to swing the hammer. It went against every protective instinct I had, but it was the only way she would ever truly feel safe in her own life again. I pulled into the parking lot of the property management office just after noon. The gray sedan was parked near the entrance. I parked in the visitor space facing the exit, photographed the sedan's plate for the file, and walked through the glass doors without giving Marcus another confrontation to use. The receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" "Conference room," I said, pointing down the hall. I didn't wait for an answer. I pushed the door open. The room was silent. The property manager, a balding man in a cheap tie, was staring at the thick printed dossier open on the table. Marcus was sitting across from him, his face flushed an ugly, mottled red. He was mid-sentence, his hands flat on the table. The property manager shifted in his chair, suddenly aware that the meeting he had treated as a tenant dispute had become a liability review. Elena did not raise her voice. She opened the binder to the first tab and turned it toward him. "This is the lease abandonment language," she said. "This is the date Marcus changed his mailing address. This is the text where he admits he moved out. This is the first drive-by I documented. This is the fake complaint notice. You can keep calling this a misunderstanding, or you can update the file before I ask counsel to review your office's role in extending his access." The fluorescent lights hummed above the table. Marcus tried to interrupt twice. Elena lifted one finger, not at him but toward the property manager, and continued reading the dates. The room obeyed her because the evidence did. D completely fabricated. "She's unhinged. You can't believe this. I have the time-stamped digital extraction on a secure drive." Elena's voice cut through his panic. She was sitting at the head of the table. Her posture was perfect. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. And the exterior camera footage of his vehicle on the property at 2:14 a.m. on Tuesday. If you require further verification, my lawyer can present it directly to the magistrate. Marcus looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. His mouth twisted. "Who is this?" "I'm the guy who ran the extraction," I said calmly. I walked in and stood behind Elena's chair. I didn't touch her. I didn't loom. I just occupied the space. And I'm the guy whose truck is currently blocking your sedan in the parking lot. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "This is a joke. You're trying to intimidate me." "Mr. Davis," the property manager said, raising a hand. He looked deeply uncomfortable, realizing he had almost stepped into a massive legal liability. "Based on the documentation Ms. Parker has provided, we will be severing your name from the lease, effective immediately. Citing the abandonment clause, any further presence on the property will result in a trespass order from our office." Marcus looked from the manager to the thick binder, to Elena. His leverage was gone, stripped down to the bolts and discarded. He scoffed, grabbed his jacket, and stormed out of the room. He shoved past me in the doorway. I didn't move an inch. The property manager cleared his throat. "Ms. Parker, I apologize for the misunderstanding. We will draft the new lease agreement with only your name by the end of the day." "Make sure the deadbolt maintenance request is marked closed," Elena said smoothly. "I handled it." "Yes, ma'am." We walked out into the bright afternoon sun. Marcus's car was gone. He must have bumped his sedan over the curb to get around my truck. He was no longer the center of the file. Elena stopped on the sidewalk. She looked down at her hands, then up at me. She rolled her shoulders once, like she was testing a body no longer braced for impact. The folder stayed tucked under her arm, and for the first time since I had met her, her hands were still. "I handled it," she said, almost in disbelief. "You did," I said. "You were flawless, and I just stood there." "You drove 2 hours to stand there," she corrected. She stepped closer. The busy street noise faded into the background. "When I brought back your brother's keys, you asked me to stay. I'm asking if it can happen again." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. By sunset, the addendum arrived in Elena's inbox. It did not magically erase 6 months of fear. Paperwork rarely has that kind of mercy. but it removed Marcus from the active lease, preserved her tenant record, and confirmed the maintenance upgrades as authorized safety repairs. Elena forwarded me a copy with no message attached. Then, 30 seconds later, another email came through. A photo of the heavy brass keyring resting on the entry table, one key removed from the loop and set aside. I stared at that picture longer than necessary. I was not proud of that. Security consultants are not supposed to get sentimental about key rings. Still, there it was, a small piece of brass evidence that a threat had lost its teeth. A year later, the house still smelled of cedar, but the quiet had been replaced. I stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. The heavy brass key ring sat on the entry table, but now it held two sets of keys, hers and mine. The front door had a new smart lock, integrated into a security grid that I maintained, but the real security wasn't the hardware. It was the absolute certainty of the person holding the code. The front door opened. Elena walked in, dropping her work bag on the floor. Her hair was tied in a messy knot, and one shoe was still half unlaced, but she smiled the moment she saw me. "Long day at the clinic?" I asked, sliding the chopped peppers into a pan. "The longest," she groaned, walking into the kitchen. She came into the kitchen and set her work bag beside the brass keyring. "It smells good." "Dinner in 10, I said, turning off the heat long enough to slide a bowl of sliced apples toward her. "Eat one of those before you tell me you forgot lunch." She didn't move away. "I was thinking about the lease today. It's up for renewal next month." "I know," I said. "I had the date saved in my calendar." "I don't want to renew it," she said, looking up at me. I paused, the knife still in my hand. "Did you find a different place?" "No," she said, her eyes bright and clear. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She pressed it into my hand. I unfolded it. It was a Zillow printout for a small, fixer-upper house across town. "I want us to buy it," she said. "Together, both names on the deed, no leverage, just a foundation." I looked at the paper, then at the woman standing in front of me. She wasn't asking me to save her. She was asking me to build with her. I set the knife down, wiped my hands on a towel, and took the printout carefully so the corner would not tear. The old rule returned with a different weight. You don't force a seized lock. You clear the debris and let the mechanism work. Elena had cleared the leverage from her life. Now she was choosing which door opened next. I looked at the brass keys on the table, then back to her. "I'll get my tools." The end.